Welcome to another episode of Nacoa's Lunchtime Lives, a series of live interviews where I speak to people that have advocated for COAs and Nacoa alike. And in this incredible episode, I speak to Stephen Lynch. Now, Stephen is a huge supporter of Nacoa, and this is a really important conversation with Stephen. We talk about policy and what we think needs to be done for COAs moving forward, but Stephen brings in a lot of his personal experiences as well, how he was affected as a child and how it still affects him as an adult today. And we really get into some thought-provoking stuff, and I really think that this is an important conversation and one that you will be able to take a lot away from. I really hope that you do enjoy this in the way that I did. If this is the first time that you've ever been here, then please do make sure that you subscribe and turn on the notifications so you know each and every time that we post a new video.
Hello, Josh.
Hello. Oh, there you go. I was feeling like Ant, but without Deck for a moment there. That's what that was starting to feel like.
Thank you for your patience, Josh. I saw you going solo there, and I thought, oh no, I'm waiting for the app to reinstall here. I'm just glad we've got there in the end.
Yeah, I think it was the people watching's patience more than mine. I was just crashing around, just taking up space. Something that I'm kind of used to, Stephen. Anyway, so
of course. I think you could have gone the full half an hour, Josh. Honestly.
I dare I say I would have put my foot in my mouth a few times if I had to do that ad lib. But how are you anyway?
I'm doing good, Josh. Doing good. Looking forward to this today. I'm a bit annoyed about the restrictions. Next week there was a couple of Christmas parties that, while they seem to be allowed, they're very likely to be cancelled. So I'm a bit disappointed with that, but looking forward to Christmas all the same.
Yeah. I think that's what we have to try and do, right? It's easy to get caught up in all the things that we're not allowed to do, but Christmas is coming, and I'm like you. I'm looking forward to be able to enjoy that. Look, why don't we, by way of starting this off, for people that don't know perhaps who you are and your relationship with Nacoa, why don't you take a little bit of time to tell us a little bit about who you are, like what you do in the world, and then we'll go on and have a look at how you're involved with Nacoa.
For sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Josh, for giving me the opportunity to do this. Thank you to everybody who's listening to this live or watching it back. I really discovered Nacoa about 2 or 3 years ago, kind of by chance, really, to be honest. I was having some difficulties in my life. I was having some pressures in my mental health. I just felt very lost, lonely, and frustrated about things. And it was just by chance that I just happened to do some Googling around this topic of alcoholism in the family, having a parent who's an alcoholic. And Nacoa came straight up in my searches, and I did some reading, and the more and more I read about the work that they do and about this issue more generally, the more and more it really resonated with me, Josh. So it was a bit of, so I got myself on the mailing list. I believe I joined as a member. My inbox started to be swarmed with updates and things from time to time, which is great. But the thing that really landed for me was the David Stafford lecture, which I believe was last year. I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago, describing things only 12 or 18 months ago. And I think you were certainly co-hosting this, if I remember right, Josh. You had Callum Best, Camilla Tominey, Sophie Kay, Dave Caldwell, and others just speaking very eloquently about their own personal experiences and why this is such an important thing to raise awareness of, basically. And I knew, listening to everybody, I knew on some level I found a very special group here. I found a very worthwhile cause, if you like. And I believe it was the next day I emailed peers, or I emailed people at the charity to say, I'm on board, I want to volunteer, give me stuff to do. This is so important, making a rod from my own back kind of thing. But I'm very, very happy to have done so. And I haven't really kind of looked back since then.
Yeah. So when you say that when you first found us, right, you said that you were struggling. had you ever, prior to that, linked alcoholism in the family or somebody that drinks in the family to how you were feeling or anything like that?
Not really. No, not really. For the longest time, I didn't join those two things together at all, really. I was always slightly aware of it in the back of my mind that my dad was an alcoholic, and that probably meant that, of course, every child's experience is unique in their own way. But I guess I did realise, that posed some sort of challenges to me. But I never thought that it was a thing. I've heard people describe this before on these lunchtime lives, where they'd say, I didn't even know being a child of an alcoholic was a thing in terms of concrete impacts later in life, in terms of psychologically, emotionally, having different types of challenges. So for the longest time, throughout my adolescence and most of my 20s, I was just kind of dealing with things in sort of mental health terms. So to be specific about things, self-esteem really is still, to be honest with you, continues to be a big challenge for me, feeling good enough. I feel like I'm one of these people who has to do a lot to feel good about myself. I kind of, there's a part of me that wants to do lots of external things. So whether it's working really hard and progressing in my career, or being really, really fit and running half marathons maybe and doing things like this, I feel like there's a part of me that's always felt like I have to go and be kind of exceptional, or to outperform the average, I suppose, to feel normal, to feel enough really. And just describing this, I can see how that's I can already see that's an unsustainable, unhealthy way to go about things, really. So that was one aspect of it, and I think a loneliness as well. So I'll just describe briefly kind of a typical feeling I would have. So Saturdays were always my favourite day of the week, because it meant I had the most time to pursue what I really wanted to do, which for me is usually doing lots of training, physical exercise, so boxing training or HIIT classes in the morning, that kind of thing. And then I really got into public speaking as well, on a Saturday as well, which I really, really enjoyed, stepping out of the comfort zone and, feeling the nerves around that, and being able to manage that anxiety, I suppose, in a very good way. And then what I noticed after, a certain time, Josh, was that despite me doing all this, despite me, on the surface doing things I enjoyed, having a decent job, good friends, going on holidays, all this kind of thing, I would still just have this real sense of, loneliness and emptiness. To be honest with you, I'd be going home on a Saturday evening or whenever, and I'd feel, there's no other way I can describe it other than this kind of big chasm inside me, and it's I think looking back, I was conscious that I'm looking for things to fill that up with. Maybe it's validation on social media for me. Maybe it's some of the things I described earlier, or overeating. That's something I've struggled with as well, and I still kind of joke about that. So it's very much a feeling of me seeking external things to fill up an internal wounds, perhaps. That's part of it as well.
Listen, firstly, I just want to, I do a lot of this now, right? So I get to hear people kind of talk like this, like a fair amount. But honestly, I always try and put myself back to where I was when I first found Nacoa. I had exactly the same experience as you, by the way, in that I knew there was stuff going on with me, but I accidentally come across Nacoa. COA is a thing. That whole thing was born out of when I first spoke to Hillary, and she told me this stuff, and I was like, I can't believe this is actually a thing, right? So that was my experience too. But to hear somebody like you talk about the things that you just talked about, particularly, let me say, as a man as well, I think is so hugely impactful, because when you talk about that low self-worth, right, that you're talking about there, but you couple it with enjoying public speaking, right? The two of them like almost don't match up, right? That doesn't make sense that we can say we have this low self-worth, but we really enjoy public speaking, right? People would say you can't have both. But that really, really lands with me, right? That whole using almost like that confidence as a way of trying to deal with that low self-worth that I felt when I was on my own. Had you before you sort of come across Nacoa, had you ever talked about that with anyone?
So in terms of, had I talked about the thing that you've just described?
Yeah, that low self-worth, that loneliness that you talk about.
Not really. Only to a few counsellors and a few therapists, I suppose, Josh. I think I wasn't able to articulate it and describe really what was going on. I think when I was really young, it was just a case of, you know, really feeling these really negative emotions. So I remember going to university in particular and like feeling just very like out of place, just feeling, you know, well, like majorly awkward in certain situations, just not feeling, you know, comfortable kind of around people. And so initially it was a case of feeling these strong emotions. And then over time, as I've done more and more reading, I guess, and as I've done more and more exploring of this with trained professionals, I've been able to identify what's really going on there, why are these things coming up, really. So like I'm a natural introvert as an example. I do like my own company, and so with the sort of education and stuff that I've, you know, been aware of all these things, Josh, it's helped me to just identify things like this and just take steps to mitigate it. So public speaking, I guess, is a good example of that. I think I've done acting training as well, and one thing I really used to hate, like with the passion, was, you know, networking drinks. You know,
Yeah.
a bunch of people in the room all stood up. I used to really hate things like that, and it was a real battle, like kind of to force myself early on to do things like that. So I've just been able to practice. You know, it's like anything. You know, I think some people call it exposure therapy, to just do a little bit of things at a time and then step it up over time. But to come back to your original question, Josh, yeah, not really. It's been only with the benefit of hindsight, only with the benefit of experience and all these things and all of these emotions, and then I guess having the experience and working with professionals to have some perspective to look back and say, you know, it's okay, it's all right. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with me, or I'm not abnormal in any way. And on some level, Josh, when I was younger, I did believe that about myself. I did think, yeah, there's something wrong with me, and then that informed my behaviour and my self-image. And then I'm sure a lot of people on the call will appreciate that with a negative self-image like that, that then informs, you know, that has a very fundamental impact on one's life, and that was certainly the case for me.
Yeah, when you say, I feel the emotion when you say it, by the way, right? Because it speaks to me in a way that I don't get spoken to a lot. When you say I felt abnormal, like there was something wrong with me, I can remember as a young boy, even in my teenage years, I can remember thinking when I was on my own, like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I like this? And I always presented very differently, right? I'm very much like you. I would say that I'm very introverted. Have you always presented as introverted? You strike to me as somebody that probably presents as quite extroverted, as in when you were at uni, people probably didn't know your awkwardness and actually may have thought the opposite about you. Would that be true?
Yeah, yes, I'd say that's very much the case now, in recent years, Josh. I'm very conscious of that when I'm in the workplace, you know, setting COVID to one side. When I'm in those sort of networking scenarios, so for example, going up to party conference in Manchester or down in Brighton, that's a very extroverted environment, and so it was a very conscious decision for me to throw myself into practicing things like that. And I think I'm relatively open about the introvert thing. I kind of just say that to people openly. I say, listen, I'm naturally introverted. Don't let me kind of fool you. I might only look very outgoing and gregarious and stuff. Again, from practice, and it's like it was a very deliberate thing for me to decide to do, because the alternative to that, I realised at some point in my early 20s, the alternative was being in team meetings at work and stuff and feeling awful, and having that awful feeling in the pit of my stomach when I knew it was going to be my turn to speak very soon, and then getting very self-conscious. And one thing which I still contend with today, actually, Josh, as well, and I notice this varies in terms of how confident I'm feeling. I'm quite sensitive to people's facial expressions, and so like if I'm given a short update in the team meeting or a short speech or something, I think there's a part of me that would exaggerate negative facial expressions. That's always been something that's been just like an ongoing thing for me, and I try to basically ignore it and not let it throw me off. But also not ignore it completely, because it might just be, occasionally it might be my presenting style. It might be I'm not talking about anything in an engaging way. So, I have to pay attention on some level. And to link it back to what we're talking about, when I was younger, I remember things like my dad kind of pulling faces at me, quite often, when I kind of say anything or when I talk to him about something personal. And then me feeling kind of taken aback by that. And so I think, the relationship I've had with that I have had and still have with my dad is it's a difficult one. I think neither of us are able to open up to each other and connect with each other. And I've come to the point where I've started to accept that now. Just accept him for who he is, accept the relationship for what it is, and hopefully do my best for us to have some sort of relationship.
Yeah. No, I totally hear that. And look, there's a lot. I don't know if you can see the comments, Stephen, as they're coming in. I've sort of not wanted to kind of interrupt and break them, but there's lots of people are talking about how you're telling their story and how they resonate. People resonating with the kind of introvertedness, but presenting in different ways. And that sensitivity that you talk about, that I use the word like hypervigilance. I always say, like, when I look at my own experience, that I believe that I've always had that level of sensitivity, which in and of itself is an amazing superpower, I believe. You talk about when you're presenting, right? I look at the work that I do when I'm in a room, I can use that sensitivity to think they want me to be a bit more fun, or they want, this is getting too deep, or whatever it may be, right? But when I was younger, I knew when my dad was going to go. Yeah, I knew when there was an argument bubbling up. I could see things in I could hear people's voices in their head before they even voiced it. Do you know what I mean? Because I came to those subtle changes. I became so hypervigilant to them. It can be a good quality in my adulthood. I think it's an absolute superpower. But I remember when I was a child, it was so distressing to be so over tuned in to such a complex environment, right?
That really resonates with me, Josh. It really does. That the hypervigilance, as you put it, being extra sensitive to what's going on with other people, and I think this is where one of the areas I've done some reading around is codependency. This feels like a deep thing for my own experience as well. There's an element of people pleasing. I think, to be honest, there's an element of people pleasing that is perhaps necessary in a lot of professional environments. There is certainly a need to fit in, and that's going to be inevitable with that. But in my opinion, one probably shouldn't be that 100% authentic self in some situations, because it's just, you know, run the risk of alienating people who you need to kind of work with in future. But that really lands strongly with me, Josh. I can really relate to that. Always on the lookout for other people's facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, taking things personally as well, even if it wasn't necessarily something that I'm doing or that I haven't done. The person might just have had a bad day. You know, my dad might have just, you know, and this was often the case, you know, he's worked a lot of hours at work and he's knackered, tired, and, you know, he's in a bad mood about something. So it wouldn't necessarily always have been about his opinion of me or my brother or anything like that. And it can be a good skill. You used the phrase superpower, I think. It can be a good skill to have in certain environments, but a lot of times as well, I want to just let go of stuff like that. I want to not have that voice in my head saying, "Oh, don't say that. Don't do this. Don't talk to that person. They're busy. You know, stay quiet." The little voice in my head kind of telling me not to take risks. You know, stay in my little box. Don't say anything. You know, no one wants to hear from me. That kind of nonsense going around in my head. So I used to pay attention to that voice quite a lot. So I know it needs conscious effort to drown it down and overpower it, really.
Yeah. This is what I always say about that level of sensitivity or hypervigilance, right? The problem is not that we feel it. The problem is that we take responsibility for it, right? That's the problem. When I start thinking I need to shrink or I need to try and desperately make somebody feel happy just because I've picked up on something that I genuinely believe sometimes they haven't even picked up on themselves yet, and I'm tuned into it, right? That's how kind of deep it goes. It's great if I look at myself as an Nacoa ambassador, I could go into a prison and read the prison room and be there with them and know how to be, and I could go into, I don't know, a corporate environment and talk about Nacoa and know how to be. That's when it's an incredible thing to be able to do, right? I can use it to my advantage. When it becomes a problem is when I'm at a family event or I'm at a social event and I can't enjoy it because I know that dude over there is stressed with his wife and this one over here doesn't want to be here, right? And then I'm thinking, I'm trying to tend to their needs instead of being with the people I'm supposed to be, right? And it is literally as exhausting as that.
Yeah, it sounds like, listen to you describe it, sounds like it's really well tuned in your case, being able to really, you know, feel what's going on for other people. And I think what's coming up for me is that's all well and good, you know, like in terms of me having that sensitivity and stuff, and where the frustration comes for me, or it has come in the past with my family, say, is when, you know, it doesn't feel like it's a two-way street. I felt like I've sacrificed, you know, my needs and things to kind of placate my dad, for example. But then I would get frustrated that it wouldn't be the other way. It wouldn't be reciprocated. I understand why that is in my own case with that own relationship. But I'm still a human being. Like I still feel like sometimes I'm like that I'm saying to myself, God, why should I put the effort in? Why should I, you know, do all that stuff when when it's not going to kind of come back.
Yeah.
There's part of me that still says that.
Yeah, of course. Look, when you can pretty much read somebody's mind, right, and you make changes to adjust to that, and then they don't make changes when you're giving clear signals, right, of course, then it's going to leave you frustrated. And then I think even, you know, we talk about this as adults now who have got life experiences, but if you take it back to what we're talking about, young children, right, a lot of children for the last 18 months may have found themselves at home in them environments with their parents constantly, right? And I guess that's why, you know, when you resonate with stuff, that's why you fall in love with something like Nacoa in the way that you do, because you recognize the importance of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, a lot of what has drawn me to Nacoa is listening to people like you, Josh. The way you describe and do your own experiences, the language you use. I guess it's the type of communication style I have more than anything. To hear people who've gone through similar experiences just simply describe it in a very brave, very sincere way. And then me listening to that and thinking, God, I know exactly what Josh is talking about there, or what Camilla is saying. That really lands with me, and I feel a bit better about myself and what happened in the past, because this experience is sadly quite a widespread thing. Very unique and individual to each person, but I'm sure there are lots of common elements to this. And I think one of the things that makes me most fired up, I suppose, whenever I start talking about this, is how things like this hold back people's potential. Children who grow up not believing in themselves, basically, not believing that they can pursue what they want to, what they're good at, whether it's music or sport or, whatever it is they want to go on and do. Children of alcoholics, I suppose, have to grow up very quickly, and they have to grow up and almost learn how to care for other people or placate them, learn how to calm down people who are losing their temper, for example. And in my case, a lot of it was a reluctance to simply just speak my mind, I suppose, or, to open myself up. It's this idea, in my case, it was this idea of being, unimportant, for want of a better word, or being regarded as unimportant or trivial, being kind of like an afterthought after things like alcohol, and maybe some other things as well. It's like kind of what my feelings were, what my needs were, always seemed to, not always, but often seemed to be quite far down the list, sort of thing. So I forget how I got onto this, to be honest, but that's where I'm going to finish what I'm saying.
No. But you started by talking about how children of alcoholics often don't go on to reach their potential, right? That feeling that you talk about, of not feeling like you matter, right? Not feeling like your voice has any meaning, right? I look at myself, to reflect on myself. I'm hugely inquisitive, right? I love asking questions. I love being curious about things. And when I was 20 years old, none of that existed in my life. The environments in which I had grown up in robbed me of that. They took that away from me, not necessarily with any blame on anyone, right? But I didn't reach the potential that I should have been able to reach as a direct result of the experiences that I had as a child of an alcoholic, right? And I think, to bring it even further back to what you were saying, the reason why you fell in love with Nacoa, right? I didn't see this anywhere else. I see a lot more of it now, and I think Nacoa, to be honest with you, I think Nacoa has kind of spearheaded this. But let's not overload people with fixes and solutions, but let's create spaces where people get to explore who they are, right? And that's what was massive for me. What with that in mind, what changes do you think? What can we do for children, right, that are growing up? We know that some of the statistics we see is 1 in 5 living with a parent that drinks hazardously, right? In your mind, what do you see changes that can be made, or what do you think we should be doing more of?
So I think there are some practical steps that can be taken in the short and the medium term, and then there's more a long-term case of raising awareness and certainly undoing the stigma around this particular issue and the wider issue of addiction, I think. And that's why the Kate Middleton and Anton Deck launching the addiction campaign last month, I thought was such a fantastic thing to have such high-profile, popular people in this country speak about that issue. And it did get some pickup in the national media, but not as much as I thought should have done, to be honest. That's a separate debate, really. So that kind of long-term thing is, for me, it inevitably comes to the issue of alcohol and culture, and I'm reluctant when I get into this territory, because I'm very conscious that having a drink, going to the pub, having a few drinks with friends, going to watch the football, having a Christmas party or whatever, it's very much a part of our culture. I come from an Irish family as well, so that's, I don't want to get into stereotypes here, but like, I'm very familiar with that kind of socializing, drinking culture. And so I think it's quite difficult for a lot of people to make that connection between what I would say abuse of alcohol is, and then the knock-on impacts, because clearly there is an important nuance there between people who drink responsibly and really enjoy it, and it's part of their hobbies and stuff, and I've got no issue with that, and I would never take any issue with that with anybody. But one thing I do regret, and I think we can hopefully make some headway, is getting away from this idea that alcohol is like this benign substance, basically, that has like no consequences if kind of people binge drink like all the time and stuff. It does have knock-on impacts on people, particularly the people closest to people as well. That's a hard kind of campaign to fight, and it requires a lot of nuance and sophistication, probably more so than I'm articulating right now. But I think that's what's facing us. In terms of the short-term things, I think children being aware through their schools, local authorities, sports clubs and fitness, that there is this support available, where it's helplines at Nacoa, some of the outreach events that they do, whether it's listening to people like Tony Adams or Callum Best, or people who they look up to, particularly with younger people, hearing them talk about their own challenges with this, and people being able to see, this is something that other people go through. These are challenges that very kind of high profile people have gone through, and they've come out the other side as well, and they're in a better place because of it. So I think it's awareness of support. I think it's the kind of visibility of the role models, which Nacoa is doing a fantastic job with, I think, in particular. And I think, to steal a phrase that Liam Byrne, MP, uses, I think he says to normalise the conversation, we have to organise the conversation. And I think one of the things I'd like to very much bring to Nacoa is simply to normalise conversations like this, in national newspapers, on TV shows, and for it to be less of a taboo issue, really, to be honest with you. I feel like we could have a long conversation about that one aspect, but I'm not sure we have the time.
No, but getting into that nuance, and I think getting into the nuance on like a public scale, and Piers has just said with alcohol's like a cultural white noise, right? It's absolutely everywhere. So communication about the harm of it can be uniquely hard. I think as well, what happens, it's like with any conversation at the moment on a public scale, right? It becomes this one or the other. Like you've got a terrible problem with it and you need to quit, or you don't have a problem with it and it can just be the social lubricant that you want, right? I think the conversation needs to move towards relationship, right? And people should just talk about what their relationship is like with alcohol, right? If you do that, then it could be, if you look at any relationship in your life, if it's become problematic, you don't go, well, you either quit it or you carry on loving it. You go, can you make some adjustments to the relationship, right? Can you make, it's not about saying the relationship is bad and you need to end it, but do you need to make some adjustments, or has it reached that stage where it has become so toxic that you need to stop it, right? Is that relationship having an impact on the people around you? Can you look at that? And I think if we can get to that kind of nuance of it, then I think we can make some headway. I think the problem arises because people become so protective of it, right? I think the people that are using it in a problematic way get protected by it, right? So they don't want the nuance. They want it to be black and white. I don't drink in the morning, so everything's fine. So it becomes really difficult. But I think what you say about the role models is a really key point, especially in schools for kids. What was your relationship like with alcohol growing up? Do you drink now?
So so I gave up alcohol. I think it was about over 3 years ago now.
Oh, okay.
It was April 2018. I always remember what weekend it was. It was the weekend Anthony Joshua fought Joseph Parker. I think you're a boxing fan, Josh. That's why
I'm a massive boxing fan, yeah. So I know when you're talking about it.
It was that weekend. I think I'll always remember it. And yeah, the reason why I gave it up is because I just got to a point in my life, you know, particularly like at weekends and stuff. I had like a very specific schedule in my life that I described a bit earlier. You know, how I love to get up really bright and early on the Saturday, do intense exercise, and kind of just enjoy myself kind of as much as I could over the weekends and be productive as well. I felt like alcohol just started to like quite interfere with that for me, and that was my own personal experience. This is not something I would hope I don't be seen to be preaching to other people about it, because everyone's different. Everyone has their own life and their own priorities and things. So the initial decision to give it up was in part it came about because a year previous to that, actually, because I signed up to do a charity boxing match, a white collar fight, and for me, the decision to give up alcohol for like the 2 months of training, it was a surprisingly easy decision for me. It was just like quite a simple calculation in my head. I was like, okay, I'm going to do all this intense training now. I'm going to fight somebody in a couple of months. Will it make it more or less likely for me to win or perform well in front of all my friends who are coming to watch as well? Would me kind of boozing every weekend, is that going to make things easier or more difficult on fight night? And it was quite an easy decision to make. And I just really kind of fell in love with that feeling of having a clear head, to be honest, Josh. And I did go back on it afterwards, but I knew that clear-headed feeling was something I wanted. Another point as well. I'll continue being candid as as I am in this interview. I just found when I was kind of overindulging in alcohol, it just led me to do some just like daft things, and sometimes I would just feel like a real prat like the next day. Probably too much, probably that was me being maybe a bit oversensitive, but the point was the same, that I would look back and think, I would never behave like that if I was sober, if I didn't drink too much. So, that started to just didn't really sit well with me after a while. That's one part of it as well.
The first thing I want to ask you very quickly, did you win the fight?
It was a draw, Josh.
It was a draw.
It was a draw, which I was disappointed with. But my opponent, he said he thought I won. He was good enough to say that. So that's something.
We'll take it as you won. Maybe one day me and you will have to have a Nacoa money raising fund for charity, a white collar match. I Bagsy Dave Coldwell as my trainer though, right?
Well, you've got an unfair advantage. You're going to have to get one of Team Fury or Joshua.
Yeah, no, brilliant. But I think it makes a really good, interesting point though, that you use that and then you stopped drinking, and it doesn't sound particularly like it was really, really bad for you, right? Like, the kind of rock bottom or what people sometimes think that you need to reach. You just made a decision that actually my relationship with it's one that I don't really want anymore, right? And people often ask me, I haven't drank now for nearly 10 years. People often ask me, do you think you'd be able to drink now? And I always say, like, if I was to drink, my problem is the things that I'm capable of once I've had a drink, I could ruin my life in one night. Like literally drinking, I could ruin my life in one night and wake up the next morning and have no idea how it had happened. So like, and I think that's true for a lot of people. I think someone just here is talking about the whole Jekyll and Hyde, yeah, how I felt after drinking. People think you're being sensitive the next day, but that hypervigilance and sensitivity that we talked about, the next morning for me after I'd had a drink, it was awful for me. That's why I used to drink all the time, because I drank to deal with the way that I felt the next morning. So I think it's, you know, for you to be, and you certainly didn't sound preachy, but for you to come out and say, you know, that relationship was one that had ran its course and you've not drank now for 3 years, I think it's a really important conversation, and probably one that people need to hear more of. It is a growing conversation, mind.
Yeah, it is. And you know what I find, I'm asked about it often because, you know, it's a very, you know, understandable question, and it comes up, you know, being around friends or colleagues, and you know, I'm ordering a Coke, or I'm ordering nowadays a fresh lime and soda, which I think is a very refreshing drink most of the time. The question's always asked. I'm always asked, you know, why, you know, why aren't you drinking, kind of thing. What led you to do it? And I think I have a lot of reasons to not do it. And you know what you said there about you could ruin your life in one night. I'm glad you said that, because yeah, there's a part of me that thinks, yeah, I just think like I have a lot to lose, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And not much to gain, really. Not
Yeah.
much to gain. It's like the calculation or the decision I made for the boxing. I was reflecting on it, and it's like, what do I really have to gain? Listen, I love socializing as much as anybody. I love, you know, I am an introvert, but I love meeting new people. I love going out and having a good time and stuff. But ultimately, for me, it's a cost benefit kind of calculation. It's weighing up the pros, and there are undoubtedly advantages to alcohol in terms of releasing inhibitions. Person, or a lot of people probably subconsciously make this calculation as well. And for me, it just seemed like a cleaner decision to make, an easier decision to make, to just say, I'll just stop doing it completely, because then it takes out a lot of the hassle in my mind of deciding, oh, will I have one glass of red, or will I have a two? But we've ordered a bottle now, or you know, 3 bottles of beer. I'm not feeling. Maybe I should have 4. You know, I can imagine me having that thought process every time I go out, and that's you know, for some people would describe that as is it rationalizing or negotiating with oneself then, and then that, to me, that creates a whole set of new problems. Then it's just an easier decision for me.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when I look at the way that I used to drink, I drink differently to the average person. I know that much. Yeah, the whole 1 or 2 or 3. Sometimes I watch Leah, and she'll have a cocktail and she'll have a bit and say it's not very nice. And then I think, well, if it's not very nice, why don't you just down the rest of it before you get the next one? She'll leave it, right? And all that. I've never understood that. Coupled with the fact that, Stephen, let me be honest with you, I could ruin my life in one night without alcohol. So for me, it's just best that I steer clear from it. But I do think it is becoming more of a had conversation. There's a lot of people talking about grey area drinking. I don't know if you've ever heard that term. There's a lot of like coaches now that are kind of coming up, which is really good, and they talk about that grey area drinking, which is kind of a little bit like what we've just discussed there, where you don't feel like you've got this extreme addiction, but you're in that kind of grey area where it feels a little bit uncomfortable and all that sort of stuff. So I think I think it's a good conversation, and it, you know, look, how we've just talked there, I do think is exactly the kind of chat that needs to be had on a public level. I just wonder if it's extreme enough for people to have on a public level, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Josh. That's part of our challenge. Those of us who are working with Nacoa and other groups in this space to change things here, to change the conversation, and to focus minds of people in government, people who make the decisions, that you know, that there are benefits clearly to alcohol and other legal substances, I suppose, but there's a whole swathe of suffering out there, really, you know, that's been exacerbated by the pandemic. There's, you know, let's talk about some of the trends that we're seeing, very unfortunate ones. You know, increased incidence of domestic abuse, increased deaths related to alcohol, and I'm sure other substances as well. People are buying more alcohol as well, so that there's clearly a cause and correlation effect here. You know, the problem with the problem with COVID is that it's made a lot of things worse, and this is one area as well. And our challenge is to get this up the agenda, get this up the priorities list. It's over 2 million children, isn't it? Over 2 million children are children of alcohol-dependent parents, or I know there's different stats and metrics we use for this, and there's a 1 in 5 statistic as well. 1 in 5 children in the UK have a parent who drinks too much, for example. So this is a widespread problem, and the whole thing with it is, you know, a friend described the issue to me as insanity in secrecy. The problem is it's so difficult for people to speak out about it. One, because it's difficult, you know, and there's things around feeling disloyal to people, to one's family. That's something that I think I've had to overcome as well. This idea of airing one's family business in public, or, you know, being seen to be pointing the finger at other people for, you know, my own problems. These are all kind of battles I've had in my mind about doing things like this, about speaking out much more. And, you know, you and I were having a conversation about this the other day, about the knock-on impacts of this. If we don't target and, you know, really get a grip of issues like this, down the line, they become much bigger challenges. We're looking at crime, we're looking at poverty, rough sleep and homelessness. And those are bad problems for a society to deal with. And they're also very expensive if we look at it economically, you know, in terms of what the government has to spend to look after these issues or to tackle issues like crime. You know, locking up people in the justice system, locking up people in prisons. This is all taxpayers' money. So there's a number of different arguments why we should try and nip these problems in the bud to the extent that we can do it. You know, we can't wave a magic wand with these things, and you know, there's no perfect solution. But I think the more and more we have conversations like this, the more we can keep putting forward statistics and evidence and drawing a link between all of these problems, basically, and, you know, normalizing the conversation, as Liam Byrne and others put it. I think over time we can, you know, we can really make a difference here and make a better space for people to, you know, lead the lives that they deserve to lead, you know, in later life, and not be saddled with this weight in the way that I was, you know, kind of for a brief period of time when I was a teenager and a young adult.
Yeah, and lots of people like agreeing with you, saying that we need to get the conversation going, and how difficult it is for people to speak out, right? There's so many different complexities as to why it becomes difficult for people, from the difficult, you know, it was the ultimate act of betrayal when we were children, if we were to speak to anybody about this. You've then got the parents, in which we're talking about who they are and the impact it will have on them. People may have siblings, brothers and sisters, who had a completely different experience to them based on their own experience, and so it can have impact on them. And so trying to like mobilize the conversation and trying to normalize it can be so difficult, right? Because Nacoa has so many kind of quote unquote secret followers, right? Because they're so scared that even if they follow the accounts online, that somebody in the family might see it. So it's a massive step, but it is one that we are tackling. It's one that we're making people feel more comfortable to get involved in, you know. And we can never underestimate the value in these kind of conversations. You know, I was talking to you the other day about this on the phone. Just people will come and watch these. People will come and watch these things, and it will have a huge impact on them, right? And it will change. It can't. I don't want to over egg this, but I believe this to be true, right? If I go back to when I was a teenage boy, and obviously we didn't have the access to stuff like this then, but if at 14 years old I could have seen and I'll say it, like a man that looks like you talking about the things, particularly that you first started talking about, that loneliness and then connecting it with being a COA, it could have been life changing for me. It really could have been life changing for me, because I wouldn't have, you know, perhaps been so riddled with shame and gone down that route so much of feeling so much shame. I would have realized that my experience makes a little bit of sense.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I was just fiddling with my phone there, Josh, just to make sure that I'm going to have power here.
That's all right. I'm Stephen. I'm an expert at this. I just keep going, looking at my screen normal. You can do the 360. I'm here for it.
Yeah. No. I feel like you can handle anything that just happens here, Josh. Keep going. Probably for the best, actually.
Yeah. I've got that overactive mind, so sometimes I'm talking and I'm thinking about what I'm going to say in a minute. Again, an exhausting quality, but one that can come in quite handy sometimes.
Oh my God! I'm glad you've said that, and I sympathise with that as well. That the overactive mind. I feel like my mind is just so switched on like that. Sometimes I'm like having conversations that I'm due to have, say, the next day or 2 or 3 days time, and my mind is like saying what I'm trying to tell me to. Oh, you need to say this, or like trying to pre-plan things and trying to contrive situations, and it's like. That's exhausting.
It is exhausting, yeah. It's so exhausting quietening the voice in my head to make sure that I listen to other people. Otherwise, I'm like, there's all these voices going on over here, you know? I used to think that I had a really bad short-term memory, but what I realized is that so often I'm just not there. I'm like over here doing all this stuff, you know what I mean? And I haven't listened to what's going on.
Yeah, I think there's a whole thing about. And I don't know a lot about this area, but I think there's a whole thing about not being present in the body and being in the mind too much. And yeah, that's something I want to do more of, is to learn to be, and not have to rely on a yoga class or, you know, like really deep meditation to do it.
Yeah.
Make that more of a normal thing.
Yeah.
Be present with people.
Yeah. But I mean, look, if you look at it in simplistic terms, right, and on a basic level, our kind of hypersensitivity, that hypervigilance, right, in the environments that we may have found ourselves in when we were young, perhaps it was an incredible survival technique to go into this part of our brain and not be present, right? Once upon a time, it made a lot of sense for me to do that, right? It doesn't make sense for me to do that when Leah's telling me the things that I need to get from the shop, right? And I get in the shop and I'm like, I don't even know why I'm here. Am I supposed to be in this shop? Do you know what I mean? Because I wasn't there. So I think a lot of people will resonate with that, and you can see that people are. Listen, Stephen, I think it does chuck us out if we're in here too long. It might not do that anymore, but it's a good line to help make sure that we draw this to the close that it needs to come to either way. The one thing that I do ask everybody that I interview on here, and I'm going to put you on the spot with the question too. If you could go back and speak to the young boy that you were, I don't know, in maybe the height of your struggles when you were a young boy, 10, 11, an age like that, what would you say to him?
I would say, take a breath. You know, it's okay. Things will work themselves out in time. Be patient. I'd say a lot of things, actually. This is why it's such a good question. And, you know, I tell myself that I'm strong enough to come through it. You know, I tell myself, you're resilient. You can come through this. This will you know, you will make something of this in the future. You will learn valuable lessons from this and take lots of good stuff from it. And you know, you're not alone. That's what we say at Nacoa. That's part of the, you know, the language we use. But I say that you're not alone here. You're not on your own facing this, even though it might feel like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, you know, you see, when I ask that question, it has the same impact on everybody, right? Because what it does is it takes you almost straight back there, and you see everyone goes, "Oh wow, there's like I'm in this. It's like a real deep and meaningful space." So I think it just shows the level of the experiences that we had at that age, right? That as an adult, when we just take ourselves back there by asking that question, there's that almost like awkwardness in us of like, oh my god, there's there's all of a sudden loads of emotion in what I'm saying, right? I think we're very good at like rationalizing and talking about things. I certainly am anyway, very good at talking about things intellectually and rationally. And people might say to me, oh wow, that's incredible, he's being incredibly vulnerable. And I think I'm not, I'm just well versed in saying the things that I know are right without actually connecting myself with the feeling, right? Which is slightly different. So it's just a powerful question. And look, before I close it down, is there anything in particular that you wanted to add, or anything that you did want to get out? We've got a little bit of time that you know, that you want to say to the people that are watching this now, or that will watch it on catch up.
Yeah, one thing I would say to people who are watching this, first of all, thank you for taking the time to do it, is to, if you are in a position where, you know, you haven't spoken to very many people about this, and if you feel like you are facing difficulty or have done in the past, then I would really urge you to speak to somebody, whether that's Nacoa's helpline, whether that's with a professional therapist or a counsellor. Start having these conversations with people who are trained people, who've heard, even though it might seem, from my experience, I always felt a lot of shame and, you know, reluctance to tell even close friends about this. But the person who you're likely to be speaking to has heard this so often before, and probably much, much worse, sadly. So I would urge people to you know, really just kind of jump in, and not jump in, you know, just take the time to unpick some of these things. I realise I'm talking about this in quite general terms, because I guess I appreciate people come from different angles to this, really. For me, it was loneliness and self-esteem and low self-worth, and, you know, and self-image and things as well. And it's only through the benefit of having conversations with trained people and doing my homework, that's the way I like to look at it, doing my research on these things, that I was able really to get some valuable perspective on these things and realise that these problems are not insurmountable. They are things that we can tackle, you know, as a team. You know, we can tackle them with people. A problem halved is a problem shared, or it's the other way around, isn't it?
Nearly.
You know, I'm a perfectionist, Josh. You know, that's another consequence of all this, I think. So go and talk to people is my takeaway on this.
Yeah, no, and listen, I would say exactly the same. You know, the one thing that's been true for me is all those things that I thought kept me alone in the world actually attach me to a whole group of amazing people that I feel a huge part of. You know, and I think you only have to look at this conversation. I come into these conversations, there's always nerves in me, right? I come into them and I think, am I going to, you know, connect with this person? You know, what's going to happen? Where's this going to go? And I've never done one where I don't feel like I feel now, which is just like, I feel whole, I feel connected, I feel part of something. These are all things that I chased all of my life, you know? And Hillary says here, working together, we are making a difference. Thank you for finding Nacoa. And I would echo that. And I want to say a massive thank you to you for doing this, right? I think it's a big thing to do it and to come on and to share in the way that you have. I just, honestly, I mean, it touches me, and it makes me feel the things that I've just said, and I don't always feel them. Yeah, I you know, I have to work quite hard to try and feel them. So to remember and to recognize that I can feel them just off the back of a conversation like this, I think is really powerful. And it just shows people, you know, if they ever feel alone, they can always pick up the phone and do what we've just done and do it with Nacoa to a helpline counsellor. Do you know what I mean? So from me, it's a massive thank you. I'm so glad that you're part of Nacoa. I look forward to what we can do, you know, as a team and as a tribe over the coming years and create the change that's needed.
Absolutely, Josh. Absolutely the same from me. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Thank you for putting your time into this great platform here and all the work you do for Nacoa. And yeah, it's a real genuine privilege to be doing this role for Nacoa and supporting their work. And I hope, and I suspect the people on the call, on these calls, will have gotten a lot of benefit from this. And it's an important message that, you know, every one of us is an important person. You know, we're worth something, and we owe it to ourselves individually and to our families and the people around us. We owe it to ourselves to do the hard work, I think, to do the painful work sometimes, but to unpick all of this and to make it easier, or, you know, less painful perhaps for other people to do the same thing. So it's very much a team effort.
Listen, the perfect way to end, Stephen. It's the perfect way to end. I literally couldn't add anything to that. From me, from everybody at Nacoa, from everybody that's watching it, massive thank you from me. Yeah, thank you from us. Roll on 2022. I'll get hold of David Colwell. You find yourself a trainer.
Freddie Roach, I'll just give him a call.
That's a name drop that not many people on this call will likely understand.
Yeah, well, yeah, fair play, yeah.
Mate, take care, and look, we'll speak to you very soon.
Cheers, Josh.
Thanks, Stephen.